but you might never get it too. All right, lesson 79. And this one is talking about transforming formulas. You should know how to do this already because you do it already, but you don't necessarily know that you've done it. So the main idea of this one is that you can take this formula, which is distance equals the rate times the time. In other words, the distance of how far you go in a car is the rate. So if you're going 60 miles per hour times the time for 5 hours, 60 times 5 is 300. That's how far that's what the distance is. The main idea is that this problem right here is the same thing as time is equal to your distance times your rate, which does make sense because if you're like, how long was I traveling? Well, you can figure out that they went 600 miles and they were going 60 miles per hour, which is their rate. So 600 miles is the distance, and the rate is 60 miles per hour. That's 10 hours. Now, you're like, but how do I know that it's the same thing? Because it's obviously, the problems are different. Well, if you jump over here to the proof here, on top I have distance is equal to r times t, the first problem. So that's what's up on top there. Now, if I want to get t by itself, how do you do that? You guys already know how to do this because you've done it with playing problems before with numbers in. Here, this is letters. Same idea. It's just that you obviously can't get rid of it completely. So you divide both sides by r because you want to get t by itself. You want to isolate t by itself. So how do you get rid of r? R times t. Well, then divide by r. So put a fraction bar and r underneath. Same thing to this side because what you do to one side, you have to do the other side to make it equal. So then the two r's cancel out right here. So what's left on this side is t. You drop the t down, and over here you have d divided by r, which is exactly what we had up here. It's just flipped around and put the t on this side. So again, it's not super complicated. You just do your basic algebra rule of what you do to one side, you have to do the other side because that equal sign in the middle is like a scale that has to stay balanced. If it doesn't stay balanced, it's not going to work out. So you can move stuff around as long as you do the opposite. This is times r, so you have to do the opposite, which is divided by r, and you do it to both sides. If you do that, it'll work out for you. So I'm going to switch my screen here. That way you all can see the examples here. Great. So we're going to start off with example 1. It's example 2. All right. Example 1 of lesson 79 here. Your equation that they're giving you, well, they give you a line there, and it is 2 segments. It's segment X and segment B, and the entire length is W. So obviously, it's kind of common sense here. W is equal to X, the X segment plus the B segment. So X plus B equals W. Now, the question that they're telling you is you're supposed to solve for X. And you can ask yourself the question, well, how am I supposed to do that? How do you get X by itself there? Well, obviously, there's a plus B. So what's the opposite of plus B? It is minus B, which none. There it is. So X plus B, you want to get X by itself. So let's do this. You subtract B right there, and you have to do it to the other side, right? You can't just leave it unbalanced now. So W minus B. So I have to make room. So on one side, what's left, this cancels out. And so therefore you have X on the one side and W minus B. What can you do with that? Leave it the way it is. So W minus B is equal to X. Now, if you look at the original thing, if you're trying to figure out what X is equal to right here, well, obviously you take the total, which is W, and you subtract B from it for that. It's kind of common sense, but now you can figure out an equation to actually explain that. So W minus B is equal to X. The way they're going to want you to write that is put the single exponent or the single variable, the letter first. So x is equal to w minus b is how you would solve for x. So that right there is your answer for example 1. Jumping to example 2. So you grab a basketball or any ball for that matter. You can figure out the diameter somewhat, but an easier way to do it is just grab a tape measure and measure the outside around the circumference of it, the whole way around. And the formula for a circle, figuring out the circumference, is c equals pi times d, pi times the diameter. So if you measure the circumference, is there a way that you can figure out what the diameter of the ball is? There is a way, but you have to get d by itself, right? So how do you get d by itself? How do you isolate it? Currently, it's attached to pi with a multiplying sign. So what's the opposite of multiplying? Dividing. So if you divide both sides by pi, always have to do to both sides. So what happens to the two pi's? Pi divided by pi is 1, so it cancels out right there. What's left on that side? You have d. That's all that's left there. And on the other side, you have the circumference divided by pi is equal to the diameter. So there you go. If you figure out the circumference of something and then divide it by pi, you can figure out roughly what the diameter is with that. You've done this before. Now that you're just figuring out formulas that actually explain why you're allowed to do that. It's kind of, you can figure it out without using a formula, but here, rather than trying to figure out the formula, you now have it and you can then figure it out. All right, so that is example 2. Example 3, then, they actually throw some numbers at you. So you take, what do they have? It's just a regular rectangle. And you know what the area of a rectangle is. It's length times W. Now here, they're throwing something else at you, and that is the area. First of all, they tell you to solve this equation for L. So you want L equals what? But then once you have that figured out, they give you two numbers. They give you the area and the width, and they want you to figure out what the length is. So first of all, we have to figure out L equals what? What's the opposite of times W? It's dividing by W. And then you have to do that to both sides to keep it equal. So the W's cancel out. L is equal to what? The area divided by the width. Makes sense because the length times width is the area. So the area divided by the width is the length. Basic information there. So right here's the formula that we want to use. L is equal to A divided by W, the area divided by the width. Well, here's a question. If A is equal to 42, see if I can do this. If A is equal to 42, throw 42 up top there, and the width is equal to 3, 42 divided by 3 is what? I have 14 for that. 14. This 42 divided by 3 is 14, so therefore that is what your length is based on that formula. All right, so there you can flip the formula around and actually figure out your answer. Example 4 then is a little bit more of the same, except this problem is fairly complicated. Some of the information that they give you, A is equal to pi r squared. Pi r squared is your area of a circle. You know that. We've talked about that before. So how do you figure out what are they asking? You're supposed to solve for r. So your problem is going to have r all by itself on the one side. Obviously, there's a fair amount of stuff attached to it. The first thing that you can do here is, how do you get rid of the pi? Times pi, the opposite is divided by pi. So you do that first. Again, you have to do it to both sides. Right, so that cancels out that. Now you have r squared is equal to a divided by pi. How do you get the squared away? You have to put the radical sign on up over it to get rid of square. If a number is squared, you have to square root it. So you do that to both sides. Obviously, that makes it very complicated. So r is equal to a divided by pi and square rooted. Now you have it figured out for r because r is all by itself on the one side. So you just transform that formula and flip it around, move stuff around, all according to math rules, and have that problem now. So they're giving you the area and telling you to use 22 over 7 for pi. So let's write this formula out. The radius is equal to the area, which is 154, divided by pi, which is 22 over 7, and that whole thing is square rooted. Now I'm going to rewrite this because whenever you have a fraction and you're dividing, you do the keep, change, flip. So I'm going to grab the eraser here and erase more than I wanted to. So 154 divided by 22 over 7, which the rules are keep, change, flip. So you change the division sign to multiplying, put it over 1 there, and then 22 over 7. Now, I'm going to have to pull out my calculator because I am not sure. I'm pretty sure you can cancel 154 out. 154 divided by 7 is 22. So this cancels out to 1. This cancels out to 22 because you can cancel them out with 7s. So 22 times 22, which you could pull out your calculator and actually figure that out. I would advise not, because if you actually figure this out, r is equal to 22 times 22. Well, right here, it's in a radical sign too. So you could figure out 22 times 22, it's probably 400 something or other, 444. And you could figure that out. Or you could just realize that, wait, there's a group of 2 here. So that means when I pull it out, it's going to be 22. So the radius is equal to 22. You could go back to your original problem, put in 22 for that, and actually the original problem is up here, and figure that out. But your answer, for example, 4 there is 22, using your transformed formula. All right, now I'm going to try and show you how to do the practice set here. More of the same. So letter A, not too complicated. For A, you are trying to solve for area equals length times width. You're supposed to solve for W. How do you get W by itself? Well, it's W times L. So divided by L. Cancels out. W is equal to area divided by length. For B, you have the perimeter. This is for a triangle. You take all 3 sides of your triangle, A plus B plus C, add them together, that gives you a perimeter. They want you to figure out for A again. Well, how do you get A by itself? It's A plus B plus C. Well, you have to do this. A minus B and minus C. That cancels out both of them. Hold up, you have to do the same thing over here. Minus B minus C. So A is equal to what? Well, you have to take the perimeter, make sure you can see here, and subtract B and subtract C, and that gives you A. It's kind of fairly simple there. If you have a triangle and it's A, B, and C, and the perimeter is all those 3 added together, how do you get A? Well, you have to get rid of B and you have to get rid of C, and that tells you what that is. So this is your formula. Transformed formula right there. If you're figuring out for L, or W and A. Now C, here is proof that you've done this before, you just don't necessarily realize it. If you need to figure out, what are they telling you to figure out? Solve for C. Well, this is a Pythagorean theorem right here. So how in the world are you going to figure out for C? Well, right now, you do this whenever you have a triangle and trying to figure out the hypotenuse. So how do you get C by itself? Well, there's only one thing that's holding C to get, like, that's attached to C right now. So square root that. So your answer is C is equal to, now there's a couple ways you could write this. You could do literally this problem right here, but if you take the square root of a squared, and add that to the square root of b squared, and write it like this, you could do a plus b is equal to c. So there's two ways you can write that there, actually. Let me just, before I tell you that's the right way to do it, I want to make sure. So this is what you could do, but if you would just follow the steps that we've done before too, this is the answer that you would get you. Square root of a squared plus b squared is equal to c. There's a transform formula, easy step right there. All right, and then D yet, they more of the same. They have a rectangle there, and the way you figure out the perimeter of that is you multiply the length times 2 and add that to the width times 2. They're asking the question of solve for the length. So you want the length all by itself on one side. How do you get rid of the length? Well, there's two ways you can do this. So I'll write the same problem up. So obviously the first thing is if we want L by itself, let's get rid of this attachment right here, minus 2W minus 2W. So the perimeter minus 2 times width is equal to 2 times L. Well, now we need to get rid of the times 2, so we divide it by 2. That cancels out. Divide this whole thing by 2. So the answer for L is equal to perimeter minus 2W divided by 2. That is one way. The other way is you see that both of these are multiplied by 2. So you can divide both of them by 2. So if you go like this, do this, perimeter divided by 2, that cancels out that and that. So what's left over here is L plus W is equal to the perimeter divided by 2. Now you look at this and say, well, I still want L by itself, so you subtract W. So the perimeter divided by 2 minus the width is equal to the length, right? Two formulas that would give the exact same answer. Then what they tell you to do is they give you a top here. The perimeter is 620 feet, the width is 140 feet. So if I plug this in, 620 minus 2 times the width, 2 times 140, divide that by 2, it should equal my length. Over on this side, you have the perimeter, 620 divided by 2 minus 140, and it should also equal the length. If you figure this out, 2 times 140 is, grab an eraser because I'm running out of room. 2 times 140 is 280. 620 minus 280. What is that? 5, 4, 340. Divide 340 in half because you have this. 340 divided by 2 is 170. That's what I got. So the length is equal to 170 if I did my math right. Over here on this side, 620 divided by 2, I can do this a little easier. So that's 310. Do this thing first, minus 140. That gives me, great, so yeah, same answer. There's 7, 170, L is equal to 170. All right, so two different equations, but proof is right here, 170 for the length for both of them. So there you go. It just explains how that all works. And all starts here. You flip some formulas around and based off of the information they give you, because they give you the perimeter and the width, or they give you, say they give you C and you know this problem, you can flip it around and they can figure out for C. So again, something you've done before, but maybe haven't realized it. So again, let me know if you have questions.